The Lord is my guide. I've got what I need. He helps me slow down and catch my breath, brings peace in the chaos.
The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures.
He reminds me of who I am and points me in the right direction. Not because I'm perfect, but because He is good.
He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for His name's sake.
Even when life gets dark and everything feels uncertain, I'm not alone.
Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for You are with me.
You are with me, You protect me, You comfort me, You show up for me, even while I feel unworthy.
Your rod and Your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows.
You fill me with hope, even when I thought I was empty. Your love never quits. Your goodness keeps chasing me all of my days. And I know, deep down, I'll never be outside of Your care.
Surely Your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Well, it's good to have you with us here in the room. Those who join us online, thanks for being with us. We are in our final hours, and when I say final hours, I'm talking about 12 and a half or so hours left in August, and then it's over. And I just want to say for some of you who are way outside of the will of God, I've been praying for you. If you have had pumpkin spice anything up to this point, it's just wrong. Pumpkin spice should not start until at least September 1st, and I'm just telling you, your life is better. You'll like it better when you are following the way God ordained things. But fall is right around the corner, and we're excited about that. A lot going on around here this fall. I'm very excited about that. Over the next few weeks, we're going to be signing up for small groups. Last year, literally hundreds of you were involved in Christ-centered small groups. It's just an amazing thing, and we hope that you'll jump in again this year and maybe even consider leading one of those groups. You can talk to Pastor Steve about that. Well, being as it's the last day of August, it's also the last week of our summer series. This summer, we've been focused on the life of David, a portrait of a heart for God. And what we've seen is one story for 13 weeks and 1,000 ways to see God's faithfulness over and over again. And we've been doing this simultaneously with reading through the book of Psalms, the 150 Psalms, a 90-day reading plan, and many of you have been doing that. And if you haven't been doing that, hey, why not jump in for the last week? Start at like Psalm 144 and just do one a day for this week, and then we'll cross the finish line all together. But it's been an amazing thing. But really, our goal for this summer series was not just to study the life of David and learn some of those stories again. And it was not just to get through the book of Psalms and read through it. Those are good things, and we did both of those things. But our ultimate goal was that we would, like David, grow in our heart for God. We'd be men after God's own heart, women after God's own heart. That we would long for that. And I said in the very first week of this series, that is our goal for this summer. And we're praying that that has been happening in our lives. And we ended that first week praying together those words of David from Psalm 139. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts, and see if there's any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. Lead me in the way that you created and designed me to live. Lead me in the life that is the way that goes to life everlasting. About 24 years ago, John Mayer had a song that came out, was really big, Why Georgia? Some of you may remember Why Georgia. But in the pre-chorus, he says, because I wonder sometimes about the outcome of a still verdictless life. And then he asks this question over and over again. Am I living it right? Am I living it right? And I thought those were masterful lyrics to ask that question, this self-examination, because our life is still verdictless. The story's not finished. The final judgment, the end of the chapter hasn't happened. That it's never too late to start doing the right thing. It's never too late to start finding and following Jesus and asking, am I living it right? Am I living in a way that will lead to life everlasting? In 2023, it's going to be a benchmark year for me. It was the year that I would be turning 60, so I knew that I was fast approaching the midpoint of my life. And so I thought, while that was kind of a joke, for the rest of you who are sleeping, you think 120, wow, who knows? Maybe it was the last, well, anyway. I thought that year that I I would talk to some individuals who had already gone where I was going. So I set up appointments with about 6 or 7 men who were all in their 70s and 80s. I think the youngest one was 72 and the oldest one was 85. And it was a one-on-one appointment, and I said, I'll buy you coffee. Here's what I want you to do for me. What advice would you have for me as I turn 60 and enter into this next chapter? You've lived this next chapter for 12 to 25 years. What advice would you have for me? And if that's too difficult, you don't feel comfortable with that, then the question would be this: what do you wish your 60-year-old self would have known that you now know? Because I wanted to hear from someone who's gone before, someone who here, so that I can ask myself, am I living it right? So that there's less regret, so that there's some things that I don't wait and miss out and think, I wish someone would have told me, I wish I would have. And the reason I say that is because that's what we're going to do today. As we finish this series on David, we're going to look to the end of his life when he looks back over his life, over the victories and the triumphs and the defeats and the joys and the memories and the sorrows and the regrets and all of life, and say, what would he say to us so that we could ask, am I living it right? Am I going in the way everlasting? Now, if you were here with us last week, I said we're going to have to skip over most of his life as the king. Last week we looked at the Ark of the Covenant, and hopefully you saw some recycle bins or a garbage can this week. And then we're going to skip all of it to the very end. And yesterday when our elders gathered together for prayer, one of our elders said, well, Bob, are you going to try to cover everything that you wish you could have covered this summer? Absolutely not. So you are welcome. But we're going to jump clear to the very end of his life. The very end, the last chapter, the last weeks, the last days of his life. And if you want to see it in all of its fullness, you could read 2 Samuel 22, 23, and 24, 1 Kings 1 and 2, and 1 Chronicles 28 and 29, if you wanted to aggregate the whole compilation of it. We're going to spend the majority of our time in 1 Chronicles 28 and 29 and really camp on one verse. And what we're going to see is, as he looks back over his life, what are his valedictory remarks? What are his parting words? What are his closing comments? What is his last advice for Israel, for his family, and I hope for us, because it applies to us as much as it ever did to any of them. But before we get into that, let's go to the very end of his life. It says this in 1 Chronicles 29, 28. He, David, he died at a good old age, having enjoyed long life, wealth, and honor. His son Solomon succeeded him as king, and everyone lived happily ever after. It sounds like a fairy tale ending of a fairy tale life. He's had a long life. He's had wealth. He's had honor. We know he's had victories. He's had success. And now his son is set up to take over, just step right in and rule the kingdom. And what's not to like about this fairy tale story life that he's lived? It's Camelot. It's everything you would always want. David has just led them through the golden era of Israel's history. Never again would they reach the apex they did under his leadership. The whole nation is united, the 12 tribes. This has not been the case for many, many years, and it would only last for one generation, because when Jeroboam and Rehoboam would get there, the kingdom would split and never come back again. And it's united, and if you've been reading through the Psalms, you may have remembered in Psalm 133 where it says, how good and pleasant it is when the brothers dwell together in unity. Most believe he was writing that because for the first time, the 12 tribes are getting along. They're together as a cohesive unit. And as a nation, Jerusalem has been set up as the capital. Their enemies are put to rest. They're no longer dealing with the Philistines anymore. There's been military victories. The borders have been expanded. They're experiencing economic prosperity like they would never experience again. And on top of all that, all the materials for building the most sacred thing, the temple of God, where the Ark of the Covenant would sit, has been collected and is just waiting to be built. And now his son Solomon is going to step right into that role and carry on what his father has been doing. Fairy tale story. Now, if you just look at it that way, that's 100% accurate. It's true, but it's incomplete. It only gives you the highlight reel. It only gives you the Facebook post. It only gets you the good side, because there's a shadow side of his life as well. My father-in-law, Lee, tells a story of when his aunt died. His aunt was kind of the black sheep of the family, colored outside the lines, a little bit of the wild child. And this is years ago, so no names. There were no innocents, so we won't protect anybody. But he and his brother were at their aunt's funeral. And they knew the lifestyle that their aunt lived. And their cousin got up to eulogize her aunt, and she went on waxing eloquently about this mother and what a wonderful woman she was and how religious. And my father-in-law's brother leaned over and said, I think we've gotten into the wrong church. Because the picture that was painted was not accurate to what they had seen in reality. And if this is all we see, we might be saying, well, that's not an accurate picture of David. Because David was no stranger to difficulties and disappointments and death and even disgrace that he brought on himself. I mean, most of us are aware that David's most egregious, immoral sin is out there for everybody to see. I mean, far surpassing a Coldplay kiss cam and way more than just blowing up the internet like Cracker Barrel changing the logo. David's worst sin, his lowest moment in life, has been put into the changeless Word of God for 3,000 years. Billions of people have been able to read it right there. Not a fun thing. How would you like to have your worst sin put in something that 3,000 years from now they're still talking about? And his life with his family, Saul, his father-in-law, hated him, hunted him, haunted him his whole life, never had a good relationship with his father-in-law. As a king, he had opposition from powerful enemies surrounding him. And then he had opposition from people within the kingdom. And worst of all, he had opposition from people within his own household. And speaking of household, his family life. If you think you come from a dysfunctional family, do a deep dive into David's family life. You will feel so good about your Cleaver family that you have. David had 8 wives, so most of you are already ahead right now. He had 8 wives, multiple children, and the children, they were like half brothers and sisters because they all had, different mothers, but David was the common denominator. His oldest son, Amnon, fell in love with his half-sister, Tamar. Tamar was this beautiful woman that was his half-sister, and there was this incestuous desire and lust for her, so much so that, this is straight out of Scripture, he ended up raping her, and David never stepped in to fix anything. And Tamar's brother, Absalom, hears about what his half-brother did to his sister. Absalom himself was a handsome man. Absalom had hair that was amazing, kind of a Fabio. Oh, so jealous am I. It says that when they would give Absalom a haircut, the clippings on the ground from his head, the hairs there were 5 pounds of hair. I'd take a few ounces. And Absalom is so upset at what Amnon has done to his sister that he schemes and eventually he murders him. He murders his half-brother, and David never steps in. And then Absalom decides he ought to be the king. So he comes after his dad, and David, while he's on the run, Absalom sleeps with David's concubines on the roof of the palace in front of everybody so they can see the disgrace on his dad. And then Absalom, his hair that was such a benefit, doesn't become so beneficial to him with the whole story of getting stuck in a tree, and he dies. And you'd think David would be relieved, but he's lost yet another son, and his response is, oh, Absalom, my son, Absalom, and his heart is just broken. His family's a disaster. And then another son, Adoniah, decides he will be the king. He's not going to wait for David to die, and he's not going to try to take David out. He just decides to assume leadership position. Just starts making calls. Just starts self-appointing himself as the king of Israel. And David's wives, well, Michal, the wife of his youth, the reward for killing Goliath. It is implied that after the ark incident that we talked about last week, they never had a good relationship at all, maybe for 30 or 40 years. And Bathsheba, this woman, this wife out of his lustful desire, while he's in his final days, she's nowhere to be found. She's not with him anymore. She was kind of the trophy wife that really doesn't want to have anything to do with the old man anymore. In fact, the only one there seems to be at his deathbed is this young, sexy virgin. And she doesn't really want to be there. She's just ordered to be there. See, David's life was not all life in Camelot with a fairy tale ending. And as is always the case, David writes a song. And the ups and the downs and the horrible ending of his life, he writes Psalm 18. It's also found in 2 Samuel 22. We'll read this, 2 Samuel 22, verses 2 and 3. It says, David said, "The Lord is my rock, my fortress and my deliverer. My God is my rock, in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation. He is my stronghold, my refuge, and my Savior. From violent men you save me, and some of the violent men are from his own household. Now, if you've read through the book of Psalms this summer, you may have picked up on the fact that David's favorite metaphor for God is rock. He uses that all the time. It comes back to, you're my rock, which on the one hand, if you really think it through, is an odd metaphor for God. God, the omnipotent God, God, the source of life, the God that speaks truth, the God who is all-powerful and in control and moving, the prime mover. A rock is not a lifeless mineral deposit that cannot walk on its own, cannot talk, cannot do anything. And he's comparing God to a rock. I mean, you've heard, as dumb as a bag of rocks. Why would he compare God to a rock? Some of you are old enough to remember a 6-month fad that happened in 1975. Brilliant marketing scheme. Where this guy picks up rocks off a beach and he begins to sell pet rocks for $4. 1.5 million rocks he sold for $4 a piece. Sold them in a little cage with a little straw in there and an instruction manual how to get them to sit and stay and to fetch. And he sold them under this premise that you don't have to feed them, you don't have to bathe them, and they're never disobedient. You have complete control of these rocks. Now, when David talks about God as a rock, I don't think he sees him as a pet rock, something he can control, something he can call on demand. But maybe there is a rock that he's been carrying around for 55 years. Maybe there's a rock that he remembers as a young boy going to the stream in the valley of Elah and picking up 5 smooth stones. And that day he only needed one, but he always kept one. Not as a good luck charm, not as a weapon, but as a constant reminder of the one who did for him what he could not do for himself, the one who's never let him down, the one who's never failed. His life, his Lord, his rock. See, David's whole life, ups and downs, his whole life is saturated with the reality of his rock. That God is the stronghold of his life. God is the foundation of his life. God is the fortress of his life. God is the faithful one. Through the ups and downs, the good and the bad, the victories and the defeats, while people would come and go and his cabinet would come and go and his family would come and go, and he couldn't count on anyone ever fully except God, his rock. And even now, dying alone, he says, there's one unchanging factor in my life. That is my rock, my God. In the early 90s, someone gave me a book that's become a classic. Many of you read it. The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And in that, Stephen Covey talks about these 7 habits. And habit number 2 is begin with the end in mind. And if you remember the chapter on habit number 2, Covey has us start by participating in an exercise to use our imagination. And he says, close your eyes and imagine that you're going into like a funeral parlor, a funeral home. And you walk in and there's some quiet organ music playing, and there's a familiar smell of lilies, and there's some muffled sobs from some people over there. And up in the front, there's a casket with an open lid. And as you walk into this, you come to the casket and you look in and you realize it's you. You're at your own funeral. And when you get the bulletin, you see what's going to happen, and you see that there are 4 people that are to be sharing that day. One is from your family, one is a close friend, one is a coworker, and the other one is from your church. And then Covey says, think about what you would want them to say at your funeral, and then in essence, reverse engineer your life and live in such a way that when they speak at your funeral, they don't have to lie. That no one has to say, are we in the right church? Because you have lived in such a way that they are just saying what they've experienced. Am I living it right? Now, David obviously did not read the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. because he lives his life in such a way that when he comes to the very end, no one is there with him. He's not surrounded by loving, doting wife or wives in his case. He's not surrounded by adoring and grieving children who are sad because their hero is dying. He's not even surrounded by loyal friends that they've gone through the difficulties of life and they're loyal to the very end. None of that. He's all alone. No one eulogizes him. No one pays tribute to him. There's not great grieving in Israel or in his home. So since no one is coming to him, he decides one of the last things he'll do as a king is to use his authority and basically command people to come to him. We read this in 1 Chronicles 28, verse 1. David summoned all the officials of Israel to assemble at Jerusalem. The officers over the tribes, the commanders of the divisions in the service of the king, the commanders of thousands, the commanders of hundreds, and the officials in charge of all the property and livestock belonging to the king and his sons, together with the palace officials, the mighty men, and all the brave warriors. Now, how many are there? I don't know, but it's got to be hundreds and maybe thousands of people. And they're all gathered together. And some of these people have been with him his entire reign. And some of these people he fought with. And some of these people may remember Goliath, and they've been with him and they've led together. And he knows this is the last time he will see them. And this is the last chance he has to speak into them and instruct them. And I think about that scene in Braveheart when Mel Gibson is on his horse, the freedom speech. You know the scene. Like he's got them all together and he's going to give them these parting words as they go in. And David is given these words. And he's got them all together. And he says this, verse 8. So now I charge you. Here's the talk. I charge you in the sight of all Israel. Your brothers are your witnesses. I'm not telling you one-on-one. We're all hearing this together. And all of Israel and of the assembly of the Lord, this is a sacred gathering. We are his people. And in the hearing of our God, with God as our witness. So he sets up the solemn nature of this event. That this isn't just, hey, see you guys later. He is going to say, in the presence of witnesses and God himself, I want to give you my parting words, my last commands. And not only for all of Israel, but such good words for us as well. And this is what he says. Be careful. Be diligent. Be intentional. Be mindful. Be purposeful. Don't miss this. Don't slide on default here. Be careful to follow all the commands of the Lord your God. Here's the benefit of that you may possess this good land and pass it on as inheritance to your descendants forever. Looking back over his life, he says, this is what I want for you, for us, for our children, for our nation, that we would follow all these commands. Everybody, walk in obedience. Walk in obedience. And all he has to do is say, look back at our history. When we kept in step with the Lord, when we followed the covenant, when we did his word, God blessed us. Every time we veered off, every time we went our way, every time we kind of got a little sidetracked, every time we got distracted, you know what happened? You could say, look at my own life. And when I walked in step with God, things were good. And some of the choices I've made, the decisions that I've done, you've seen. It's not been a secret. Everyone has seen these things. And maybe they say, your life is better. You'll like it better when you follow his ways. So do this. Because you have a choice. Am I living it right? And when we rebel, when we go away from God, sin has built-in consequences. Will God forgive? Oh, absolutely. He will forgive. He'll take our sins, our transgressions, Psalm 103, cast them as far as the east is from the west. Absolutely. But sometimes there are consequences that remain. In David's worst sin, Nathan said, oh, you're forgiven. But there's some consequences that are going to be a part of your family forever. And David knows. I mean, he's tasted the bitterness of the results of his own rebellious choices. He knows about the late night salty tears that come down when he's thinking through all of his mistakes. He knows about that knot in the pit of his stomach when what he thought was done in secret becomes exposed to everybody. He knows the weight of guilt and the pain that he bears thinking about the innocent lives that were affected and even ended and destroyed because of the choices he made. And he says to all of Israel, and he says to us, it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be that painful. It doesn't have to be that difficult. Walk in obedience. Follow all of God's commandments, not a la carte, pick and choose, all of them. And then everybody's there, and then he changes, kind of shifts his attention, his focus. Chapter 28, verse 5, he says, of all my sons, and the Lord has given me many. There are 19 of his sons that are listed by name in the Old Testament. 8 wives, 19 sons, there may have been more, but 19 that are listed by name. Out of all these sons, he, the Lord, has chosen my son Solomon to sit on the throne of the kingdom of the Lord over Israel. Now, let's pause here for a minute, because for some of us that are familiar with biblical Israel history, we know there were the period of the judges, there was King Saul, King David, King Solomon, the Jeroboam, Rehoboam, the split kingdom. It was never the same. We just think, okay, Saul, David, Solomon. The very fact that Solomon is even existing and even considered to be the king and chosen by the Lord is nothing short of the grace of God. Because where does Solomon even come from? Who's Solomon's mom? Bathsheba. Let's go back to that story. David, the man after God's own heart, on his palace roof, sees Bathsheba, and David knows the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments say, thou shalt not covet your neighbor's wife. Broken. It says, you should not commit adultery. Broken. It says, you should not murder. Broken. And we'll give this one a half. Should not bear false witness. He tried to cover things up. Kind of broken. David breaks 3.5 to 4 of the big 10 in the start of his relationship with Bathsheba. Nothing but rebellion and sin and immorality. And yet, God in his grace and goodness somehow redeems that and brings good out of it. That's the goodness of our God. Now, that does not mean go out and sin and see what good God brings out of it, because there are consequences that will go with it. But it's just the goodness of God. Oh, and there's one other thing about this Solomon. Chapter 29, verse 1. And King David said to the whole assembly, my son Solomon, the one whom God has chosen, is young and inexperienced. See, in all the pictures in the Bible story, picture books, whatever, Solomon's this grown man, but it says he's young and inexperienced. How young and how inexperienced is he? Well, in my study of this, there's not full agreement, but there's a range that everyone agrees on. That some would say Solomon may have been as young as 12 years old, and no one ventures past being 20. You see, Bathsheba came into David's life late in his life. She was a bit of a trophy wife for him. And now he has this young son as he's coming to his last days. And just for the sake of our argument, let's split the difference and say he's 16 years old. He has no military experience. He has no political experience. He has no experience in how to keep the 12 tribes unified, how to run the kingdom. In fact, later in 1 Kings chapter 4, Solomon himself says, I am just a little child, very young. And now David, as he's given his final words to Israel, he turns to this young son of his that God has chosen to take the throne. And he's going to give him some advice. And I think, what advice would he give him? Well, here's how to do military strategy. And I know because I've had a lot of experience here. Here's how to keep the 12 tribes united. This is what you're going to have to do. Here's what you need to do politically. Here's how to write cool songs. There's so many things he could have said. But he has this moment. And look what he says is most important, what's most first and foremost. 1 Chronicles 28, verse 9. And you, my son Solomon, acknowledge, a better translation of that word is know know the God of your father. Solomon, I got to tell you, there's a lot of things you don't know. There's a lot of things you're going to experience. But this is so important for you. Above all else, more than anything, know God. Know him. And not just an acknowledgement of him or knowing about him. That Hebrew word know there is the word yada. Most of you know it from Seinfeld when they use the phrase yada, yada, yada. And in Seinfeld, the yada, yada, yada means blah, 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 whatever, 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 no big deal. That's the word yada, but used in kind of a throwaway manner. The Hebrew word yada is the exact opposite. It's not blah, blah, blah. Yada, to know, is not to just know about, not to just give intellectual assent, not to just give a head nod. This yada means to know deeply, intimately, relationally, experientially, personally. And he's saying, I want you to know, really know God. Don't just know about him. Of course, we all know who Yahweh is, but I want you to know him. The depth of the intimacy, when used in a physical sense, in a marriage, it says that in Genesis, Adam knew Eve and she conceived. In a spiritual sense, David is saying, I want you to have the deepest, most personal, experiential relationship with God. I want you to know him. Let me illustrate it this way. For me, since we're talking about Adam and Eve and her conceiving, I can know about childbirth. Okay, it seems to come as a shock to many of you. I could go read some books, get certified as a doula, daddy doula and pastor, full service, right here. I could even go back to school, get my doctorate, become an OBGYN. You could call me BOBGYN. I could deliver hundreds and thousands of babies. I can answer all your questions. I can know all about childbirth. But you know what I'll never know? I'll never know the miracle and the mystery of a baby growing within me. I will never know what it's like to have something that's a part of me, but it's a human being independent of me and the 9 months and the kicking. I'll never know the pain of delivering it. I'll never know this baby depending on me for its sustenance. I'll never know that. I can know about childbirth, but I can never know childbirth. And David says, Solomon, I don't want you to just know about God. I don't want you to just be the Bible answer man and know all the quizzing answers. I want you to know the God of your father. David, who wrote these psalms of passion, of worship, of praise, of honesty, of lament, because he knew and trusted his God. I want you to know God. This is above all else. There's going to be a lot of challenges as a king. This has got to be where you start. And maybe David has already seen in young Solomon something about this young man, this acumen, this propensity for curiosity, for learning, for understanding, for wanting to know how things work, for being able to explain things. The kid that you give a present to on Christmas morning, and by noon he has it completely torn apart because he wants to know, how did that work? And maybe he's got this longing for knowledge and wisdom, and those are all good things. But paramount is knowing God. And Solomon would learn, and he would grow. A little quick rabbit trail, fast forward, 1 Kings chapter 4, this talks about Solomon, who is said to be, the wisest man ever lived. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. He described plant life from the cedar of Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of the walls, from these large trees to these weeds that just happen in the crack. He knows all about botany and all these things. He also taught about animals. He knows zoology, birds, ornithology, reptiles, lizardology, and fish, whatever, ology. Men of all nations came to listen to Solomon's wisdom, sent by all the kings of the world who had heard of his wisdom. He knows all these things. David says, you're going to know all these things. You're going to have more wisdom than anybody. But this has got to be most important, that you know God. That you know God. And maybe David saw something else in this young man. the young Solomon has an eye for the ladies. And maybe David saw a little of himself in his son. And knowing the way he was, that this would always be a weak link in his chain. And that the women could become a distraction for him and actually drag him away from the God of Israel, which ultimately would happen. And so David says, son, listen to me. First and foremost, most important, above anything else, know God the way I have. Become a man after God's own heart. You see, friends, here at Cornwall, we talk about the reason that we exist is to help people find and follow Jesus. That's it. Not that you would know about Jesus, but that you would know him deeply, intimately, personally, relationally, experientially, that you would know him. Now, that is incredible, and we could stop right there, and many of you wish we would, but we won't. Because David doesn't. It goes on. All right, but we are going to have to fly. I didn't realize how long I'm going. All right, where are we? 1 Chronicles 28, verse 9. And you, my son Solomon, acknowledge, know the God of your father, and serve him with wholehearted devotion, with a willing mind. Serve him. Don't just know him, but serve him. And serve him not just reluctantly, and serve him not begrudgingly, with a willing whole heart, and with your mind, that you would serve him. Because you can fool everybody, but you're not going to be able to fool God. Look what he says, goes on. For the Lord searches every heart and understands every motive behind the hearts. Isn't that what David writes in Psalm 139? You have searched me and you know me. So he says to Solomon here, serve him with all your heart and mind. Be willing to do that. Serve him joyfully. David would write about that in a very familiar psalm, in Psalm 100. Shout for joy to the Lord, all the earth, and serve the Lord with gladness. Come before him with joyful songs. He says, son, know God deeply. Serve him willingly, fully, joyfully. And then he throws in at the end an if-then promise. He says, let me just tell you about a reality. It's a reality that you need to be aware of. Back to Chronicles 28:9. And you, my son Solomon, acknowledge the God of your father. Serve him wholeheartedly, devotion, willing mind. Lord searches all the hearts. And then he says this, if you seek him, he will be found by you. But if you forsake him, he will reject you forever. Son, I'm telling you, this is so important. And maybe David thinks back to Samuel, the old prophet, who was a man of God, but his sons didn't seek God. Maybe he thinks back to those early years when Saul was the king. Saul didn't seek God. And maybe he says, Solomon, you've seen your half-brothers and sisters. They weren't seeking God. Maybe he says, you know about my life. There have been seasons where I wasn't seeking God. But if you seek him, he'll be found. Years later, Jeremiah would say the same thing in Jeremiah 29:13. You will seek him and you will find him when you seek him with your whole heart. And years later, Jesus would say the same thing, Matthew 7:7. Ask and you'll receive, seek and you will find. And years later, the writer of Hebrews writes the same thing, Hebrews 11:6. And without faith, it's impossible to please God. So anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. It's a promise. If you seek God, you will find him. So he says, seek and do not forsake him. You seek him with all you've got. And I'm thinking, in this moment, when David is there and there's hundreds and thousands of leaders of Israel, he's giving these last statements. He's got his 16-year-old son that's going to take over, and he's worried. He's worried, as many of us parents of teenagers have been, like, is any of this sinking in? Is he hearing me? Because, not you, but when I had teenage girls that were 16, they didn't hear a word I said. And maybe David's saying, I just don't know. Will he actually listen and do these things? And David does what many of us have done. He prays. 1 Chronicles 29:19, and he says in this prayer, and give my son Solomon the wholehearted devotion to keep your commands, your requirements, and your decrees. God, I love this boy. And the task of leading the kingdom and building the temple, and his propensity towards knowledge, he can get too smart for his own good, and his eye for women that can drag him away. So God, I'm praying. Protect him from himself. Let him hear these words. Let him follow you. And I wonder, this one is not in the Bible at all. This one is not biblical. It's biblical. I wonder, you got this big ceremony going on, David saying his last words, and I wonder if in that moment he says, Solomon, one thing I want to give you. I know it doesn't seem like much, but I was about your age when I picked this up. And I've told you the story, son. And for 55 years now, I've carried this with me. And I want to give it to you. Not as a good luck charm, but as a reminder, because I'm not going to be able to be with you anymore. And I want to be a reminder to you that every time you see it, every time you feel it, that you would be reminded that there is a rock, there is a God who is always faithful. And the best life is when you follow him. And I wonder if there was almost like this ceremonial, I know it doesn't seem like much, but it has seen me through as a reminder of who my rock is. And at the end, David basically writes another psalm that doesn't make it into the book of Psalms. In 1 Chronicles 29, I'll read you a couple of these verses. So David praised the Lord in the presence of the whole assembly, saying, praise be to you, O Lord, God of our father Israel. From everlasting to everlasting, yours, O Lord, is the greatness and the power and the glory and the majesty and the splendor. For everything in heaven and earth is yours. And then this line, and yours, O Lord, is the kingdom. You are exalted as head over all. David doesn't say, and Lord, you're the Lord of my kingdom. I'm the king over all. And maybe David remembers that Israel was never supposed to have a king. It was supposed to be a theocracy. God was supposed to be their king. He says, God, this kingdom is yours. It's not mine. It's not Solomon's. It's yours. And you are head over all. As he looks back over his life, he sees the ups and downs, the victories, the defeats, the joys, the regrets. The one constant has always been God. From start to finish, God is the hero. God is the one, not David. It's all about God. Real quick, 3 or 4 times this summer I referenced this book, Leap Over a Wall by Eugene Peterson. At the end, he writes this about David's life, and I thought this was so profound. He says this, David's life is characterized by God's mercy, God's grace, God's love. There is no moral or spiritual symmetry between David and God. It is totally lopsided on the side of God. Unknown, David is named and known. Unequipped, David is triumphant. Undefended, David finds refuge. Undeserving, David is forgiven. Unworthy, David recovers his kingship. The David story is a gospel story. God doing for David what David could never do for himself. A sinner that's saved. It's a story that gets completed in the Jesus story, which features a God seeking the sick, the rejected, and the lost. David's story is our story, where we are not the hero, but God is, in all his grace and goodness and love. So David's life ends this way. No big fanfare. Acts 13:36. For when David served God's purposes in his own generation, he fell asleep, died. He was buried with his fathers, and his body decayed. The end. Because it's not about David at all. It's only about God. See, this is the end of the series, but it's not the end of the story. Oh, we've looked at one story for 13 weeks and 1,000 ways to see God's faithfulness, but now this is our story with all of our days, with unlimited amounts of God's faithfulness. So take these words from a dying man who looks back over his life. Walk in obedience. Know God. Serve him joyfully. And seek him with all you've got, because he is faithful.